30 years in the grand history of empires, that's nothing, right? It's just a blink of an eye. But from 1290 to 1320, there was this one dynasty in India that didn't just rule, they totally re-engineered the idea of power itself. We're talking about the Khilji Dynasty. And believe me, this was an era of shocking military expansion, just audacious economic control, and an ambition so ruthless, it's literally the stuff of legends.
But look, this isn't just going to be a history lesson with dates and names. No, it's really about a problem that every single empire has faced. Conquering is one thing, but actually governing, that's way harder. I mean, think about it. How do you pay for a massive army? How do you feed everyone? And how do you keep the whole thing from just collapsing? Well, the Khiljis had an answer. And it was radical, it was brutal, and honestly, it's what makes their story so absolutely fascinating.
Okay, so where does this all begin? It starts with a coup, of course. For decades, right, the Delhi Sultanate had been run by the Malik dynasty. You might know them as the Slave Dynasty. But then, in 1290, you've got this group of ambitious Turco-Afghan generals kind of on the outside looking in, and they see their moment. They saw their chance. And they didn't just swap out the guy on the throne. No, they completely shattered the old way of doing things and grabbed power for themselves.
So what was the big deal about the Khiljis? What made them so different? Well, it boils down to two things. First, just relentless, aggressive military expansion. And second, administrative reforms that were so radical, so out there, people at the time could barely even imagine them. You see, they didn't just want to rule the empire, they wanted to totally rewire its DNA. And the craziest part? They tried to do all of this in just 30 years. 30.
All right, so the guy who founded the dynasty was Jalal-ud-din Khilji. But he is not the main character of our story, not by a long shot. The person who really cast this massive shadow, the true architect of everything we remember, was his own nephew and son-in-law, a man named Alauddin. And his rise to power, wow, it's a story of ambition so dark, it could have been written by Shakespeare himself.
So you've got Jalal-ud-din, right? He's an old man, and everyone knows him for being kind, lenient, merciful. Then you have Alauddin. He's young, he's brilliant, and he looks at all that mercy and doesn't see a virtue. He sees a crippling weakness. In his mind, you just can't build an empire on being nice. So what does he do? In an act of just stunning betrayal, he lures his own uncle into a trap, has him killed, and takes the throne for himself. Just like that.
So there he is. His uncle's blood is on his hands, the crown is on his head, and Alauddin immediately looks outward. His ambition? It was absolutely huge. He wanted to take the Delhi Sultanate and forge it into a true pan-Indian empire. But, as we know, empires aren't built overnight, and he had massive threats coming from the outside, and plenty of enemies on the inside too. First up, he had to deal with the Mongol problem. And this was a big problem. For years, the Mongol armies were this terrifying, unstoppable force just looming on the frontier. So what did Alauddin do? He didn't just hide behind walls. No, he went out, met them on the battlefield, and absolutely crushed them. He secured his kingdom from this massive threat. And once the north was safe, that's when he launched his own campaigns, snapping up key places like Gujarat, Ranthambore, and the legendary fortress of Chittor.
But Alauddin's vision, his map, it went way beyond the old borders of Delhi. He was looking south, because he craved the incredible wealth of the southern kingdoms. And to lead this completely unprecedented campaign, he needed his best guy. He chose his most trusted, most brilliant general, a man named Malik Kafur.
And with Malik Kafur in the lead, the Sultanate's armies just stormed through the south. They went further than any northern army had ever gone before. I mean, all the way down to Madurai. But here's the really clever part of Alauddin's strategy. He realized he didn't want the headache of actually ruling all these distant places. He just wanted their money. So he'd defeat their kings, but then he'd leave them on their thrones. There was just one condition. They had to send a never-ending stream of tribute. We're talking gold, jewels, elephants, all of it, flowing back to Delhi to fuel his empire-building machine.
Okay, so conquering all this land is one thing, but paying for it? That's a whole different ballgame. Alauddin now has this huge, permanent army that needs to be paid, fed, and armed. And that meant he had to completely overhaul the state's economy, the whole administration. This wasn't just some new policy. No, this was a radical re-engineering of the state from the ground up.
So he had this plan. It was this kind of stunningly modern, three-part blueprint to just smash the status quo. Part 1, seize absolute control of the markets. Part 2, completely overhaul the revenue system to squeeze out every last drop. In Part 3, take all that money and pour it into creating the most professional, most disciplined army the subcontinent had ever seen.
The logic here was, well, it was brutally simple. He's got this massive army, right? But his treasury isn't a bottomless pit. If he paid them all high salaries, he'd go broke. So he just flipped the whole problem on its head. Instead of raising their pay, he forced prices down. He put in these super strict price controls on everything, and I mean everything. Grain, horses, cloth, you name it. And what does that mean? It means he could pay his soldiers a smaller salary, but that salary could buy them more stuff. And to make sure everyone followed the rules, he created a special market police force, the Shani-Amandi, and they would come down hard on anyone who dared to cheat.
All right, next up, funding this whole machine. Where's the cash coming from? Well, Alauddin's answer was both audacious and incredibly brutal. He raised the land tax to, get this, 50%. 50. A full half of everything a farmer grew now went straight to the state. Just imagine that.
And he didn't even stop there. See, it wasn't just about the high tax rate, it was all about control. He set up this whole new government department to collect the tax directly from the farmers. He completely cut out the middlemen, the local landlords and chiefs who had been skimming off the top for centuries. This was a brilliant move, really. It was a double win for him. First, way more money flowed directly into his treasury. And second, it stripped his potential rivals of their wealth and their power base.
And all this wealth, all this control was funneled into one ultimate goal, building the perfect military machine. He got rid of the old system where he had to rely on nobles to bring him troops. Instead, he built his own massive, permanent, standing army, and he paid them in cash, directly from his treasury. And to stop corruption, which was rampant, he brought in two revolutionary ideas. The first was called DAG. They literally branded every single army horse with a unique mark. The second was Chera, a detailed written record for every single soldier. Think of it like a medieval version of a serial number and a biometric ID. It made sure he was paying for real soldiers and real horses, not just ghosts on a payroll.
So, let's recap. Alauddin has built this incredibly powerful, super centralized, and frankly, fearsome empire. But there was a fatal flaw, a critical vulnerability. The entire system, every part of it, was built around the genius and the will of one man. So the big question is, what happens when that one man is no longer around?
Well, the answer is it all falls apart. And the decline was just shockingly fast. Alauddin dies in 1316. His son, Mobrak Shah, takes over. And he turns out to be a really weak, inefficient ruler. All those strict controls that Alauddin had put in place, they just vanished. The court exploded with conspiracies, and the empire just started to crack and fracture. In only 4 years, just 4 years, the whole dynasty was a complete mess.
And then, finally, in 1320, the whole thing just collapses. The last Khilji ruler is killed, overthrown by one of his own governors, a guy named Ghiyas-ud-din Tughlaq. And he, in turn, would start the next dynasty, the Tughlaqs, built right on the ashes of the Khiljis. And just like that, the brief, brilliant, and brutal Khilji era was over.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway from this 30-year storm? What did they leave behind? Well, first, they totally redrew the map of India, pushing the Sultanate's power deep into the south for the first time. Second, Alauddin's radical ideas, things like a state-controlled economy and a professional army paid in cash, became a kind of blueprint that future rulers would look at and copy. But maybe the biggest lesson, the most important one, comes from their collapse. It proves that a system built entirely on the genius of one single person is pretty much guaranteed to crumble the second they're gone.
Which brings us to our final question, and it's a big one. How should we remember Alauddin Khilji? Was he a visionary reformer who built a powerful, secure state using brilliant, even if they were brutal policies? Or was he just a tyrant whose empire was always doomed to fall apart the second his iron grip loosened? That's the complex, controversial legacy he leaves behind for us to think about.